On TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV.
Good evening and welcome to the Independent Republican Mike Graham. You're with Talk, we're on TV, we're on radio, we're online and we're on your smart speaker as well. Coming up, Government Minister Mike Freer, who avoided being murdered, it steps down as an MP over fears for his personal safety. Plus, the suspect in the Clapham chemical attack is a former asylum seeker who had his application denied twice before being granted the right to stay. Conservative MP and Justice Minister Mike Freer is standing down at the next election because he says he's been subjected to constant intimidation from the banned radical Islamist group Muslims Against Crusades. Let's bring in the panel. Editor at Spiked Online, Tom Slater, is here. Political editor of the Daily Express, Sam Lister. And barrister and broadcaster, Andrew Eborn. Very good evening to all of you. We also got the breaking news tonight that the man who's being sought for the chemical attack in Clapham last night by the name of Abdul Aadii, who was identified earlier on today. It turns out he's an asylum seeker, former asylum seeker, who had his case turned down twice and is now finally been given the right to stay here. That's the latest picture of him with a very bad-looking injury to the right side of his face, which we can only assume was caused in the attack last night. I mean, we've got some very dangerous people in this country, and they all seem to have been let in by the Home Office. No, I often say, I mean, we spend a lot of time having a go at MPs on this show and on this station and lots of other places as well, and they're big enough and hairy enough to take it usually. But the point is that, you know, it's very clear that many of them are decent people. They go in, they do a job, sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully. But, Andrew, I mean, we've got a situation here, surely, where there are rules against making threats to people. I mean, this guy, Mike Freer, had his shed set on fire. He's had numerous threats made to his physical person for about 14 or 15 years. You know, how is that possible?
Yeah, it's absolutely abhorrent. As you say, you might disagree with their policies, but there shouldn't be, there's no place for threats in politics or anywhere else.
Anywhere else.
And they're not idle threats either. They're not idle threats. We talk about Joe Cox, we talk about Sir David Amess. You had Stephen Timms, who was stabbed. The fact that they have to walk around with stab-proof vests and things like that is abhorrent. And the problem is this, is that we have a lot of things on social media, which is inflammatory language. And you're getting the spite and the hatred on social media spilling out onto the streets. And this is a real concern. We would need the best people who can be our advocates in politics. If you drive people away
but I don't know about this, though.
Good.
I've had this argument with people before, because when they got up in Parliament after David Amess was killed and started talking about, oh, it's all the social media, it's terrible, you know, we've got to stop being so mean to one another. Well, I'm sorry, people on social media are not the ones responsible for killing MPs. The person who was responsible for killing David Amess was an Islamic fundamentalist terrorist. These people who are threatening Mike Freer, Islamic fundamentalist terrorist people. You know, the person who killed Joe Cox, some kind of nutter who was said to be a right-winger. I think he was just a nutter. You know, I mean, the fact is that these are people who are dangerous in this country, who we should be tracking.
And you make a fair point, Mike. It's not everybody from a particular group. These are lone individuals often who will turn around and do something abhorrent. But
the guy who stabbed Timms was a woman. I think it was a woman. He was an Al Qaeda sympathiser.
Exactly. And that's why we need to name the ideology that's fueling this. Yes, there have been, obviously, Joe Cox was murdered by suspected right-wing, far-right extremists. There are also attempts on the Labour MP Rosie Cooper from a neo-Nazi, which was thankfully foiled. But we have had a string of attacks on MPs now by Islamist extremists. There was the 2017 attack on Westminster itself, in which no MPs lost their lives, but obviously members of the public.
Lots of other people
and PC Keith Palmer lost his life as well. And I feel like this discussion we get into about social media and shouldn't MPs be nicer to one another and we should be nicer to MPs, it's a deflection activity. It's because people are nervous about talking about the threat of Islamist extremism, more so than they are nervous about talking about the threat of far-right extremism, even though it's much larger.
But we've got to get out of this nonsense of not mentioning it. I mean, even the guy in the chemical attack, he wasn't named and identified until this afternoon. Now, the attack happened last night at around 7 o'clock. We reported it on this show. And, of course, whenever there's no identity given or no picture sent out, immediately people suspect, well, there's a reason for that. And, of course, there is a reason for that. They don't want to do it because they're sort of hoping they'll somehow, you know, arrest him by chance and they won't have to put out the fact that he's got a Muslim-sounding name. I know it sounds ridiculous, but that's how they operate.
You're right, we mustn't operate on fear, but there's also legal constraints in terms of you don't want to prejudice any criminal
No, they can put his name out. No, that's
exactly.
rubbish. They can put his name out, and if you're looking for somebody, how about you put his picture out?
Yeah.
What logic would you not put a picture out?
You're absolutely right.
If you're looking for people.
You mustn't restrict yourselves from being able to enforce these sort of appropriate steps.
And I think on this point, on this case, actually, there are questions for the police to answer, because why was that picture not issued when this is a person who clearly is a potential danger to the public? And so you can't...
It's a very striking picture.
Absolutely.
If you see a guy with a great big black mark on the right side of his face, that's him.
You're going to know who he is pretty quickly, and you'll be able to ring into the police. But I think, the police should have put this out. I'd be interested to know what their official reason is for denying that chance over the last 24
also,
hours.
I don't understand. We have cameras everywhere. We're one of the most photographed people in the world. Why we can't instantly say, there he is? You've got that picture there. You'll have a camera a few yards down working on that sort of premise. It's crazy he's not already in custody being interrogated.
Right. And what about these characters from Muslims Against the Crusades? I mean, Anjem Chowdhury apparently was one of their sort of backers way back in 2010. I don't know whether he's still involved with them now, but the bottom line is surely the police should be questioning people from that organisation, identifying them and making sure that they're not threatening, because who else are they threatening? Because we've got the Palestinian March coming up this weekend. Finally, the police have actually issued a statement to say they're going to curtail it in Trafalgar Square. It's not going to be allowed to go down Whitehall. So they have at least now finally said enough is enough. You can't just keep having these marches willy-nilly, go wherever you like. So, I mean, there could be more trouble on Saturday now.
There could well be. And it really stretches credibility that you have that organisation who are issuing credible threats, ones which were carried out, whether it's by them or someone associated with them, that's not clear. The fact that that was openly published on a website that you could just Google and find, and yet they weren't looked into by the police. Absolutely shocking, particularly in the climate that we find ourselves in and certain MPs find themselves in at the moment.
It really is extraordinary. We can't carry on like this. It seems to me that we've reached this kind of point now where Mike Freer should be somehow a catalyst, shouldn't he? For the public to realise that this is a terrible place we've got to, for these ridiculous marches about Israel to stop, and for the government to finally get a grip of this bloody asylum system, which is useless.
The asylum system, well, if they can solve that, then, that's quite an impressive thing. It's such a huge issue to solve. And obviously they've been trying to grapple with it for 14 years. But
we found this, what we heard this week, didn't we? That they've got a load of people actually missing. They don't really know where people are.
That's horrendously worrying, isn't it? We must be able... Again, it's going back to the point, there is technology everywhere. We should be able to track people as soon as they come onto our shores. You were talking previously about finding people in woods and stuff like that, when you were on the South Coast with your children. But it's crazy. We should be able to identify anybody who's on these shores. Where they're a threat, we need to take appropriate steps to stop them.
And that's exactly what the public, I would think, wants. And that's exactly what we're not getting. And I feel really awful for Mike Freer because, this man has been very, very pro community. As you heard him saying there to Julia Hartley-Brewer, he goes to mosques and he has surgeries inside mosques, and yet apparently he then even gets threatened for doing that because they called him a Jewish pig. He doesn't happen to be Jewish. He's not Jewish, in fact. We've reached this point now where we can't any longer just ignore it. No. It's got to be out there, front and centre, and people have got to take a stand and say, look, enough is enough here.
And it's not about people being mean on social media.
No.
A tweet did not menace Mike Freer. A tweet did not kill David Amos. No. And it wasn't a tweet when that gentleman showed up in Golders Green last week with a knife threatening people at a kosher supermarket.
Yeah, exactly.
This is a form of extremism that we're seeing popping up all across society, and yet we're terrified of even talking about it openly. It's incredible.
It is absolutely incredible. And more than that, the police are terrified of talking about it openly, and an awful lot of MPs. I mean, people have said to me today, Suella Braverman has come out very much in defence of Mike Freer and said, this is a direct result of the police not doing their jobs properly, of the judicial system not prosecuting people properly. But we haven't seen anything from Rishi Sunak. I don't think we've seen anything from Keir Starmer. The chief politicians in this country need to be a bit more outspoken when stuff like this happens, don't they?
I think Keir Starmer is in a very tricky position on this because clearly...
Well, he shouldn't be.
But for the Labour Party, this is a really, really big issue for them. They are struggling. They're already losing a lot of support in the areas that you would expect them to win at the next election, where there are large Muslim populations. There's lots of talk in places like Rochdale, which is a by-election soon, in parts of West Yorkshire, where there are large Muslim communities, that those communities will field independent candidates at the next election over the Gaza row. and that will significantly bite into the Labour vote. Now, Keir Starmer clearly is very conscious about this, and so
we
doesn't
need
want to rock the vote.
with a spine, don't we?
Yeah.
This is what we need. We need people who stand up against this. It's clearly wrong.
If you were
they're
Keir
worried
Starmer,
about
though, trying to win this next election, what would your choice be?
But I tell you what, the general
thing,
public would have more respect for him if he turned around and called it out. These are lone wolves tend to be. You're not going to ostracise basically everybody. You'll turn around and calling it out. You get more respect if you did that.
Yeah, but Sam's saying...
I don't think he'll listen to you, though.
But it's not just about that. It's like the whole kind of belief system of the Muslim communities who are largely in favour of a free Palestine and who will therefore be against his view that there shouldn't be a ceasefire. And in fact, he backs Israel to do whatever it is they have to do to eradicate Hamas. But we can't have our political system being hijacked by a load of people who are in support of a free Palestine. This is bloody Britain we're talking about, you know? If you want to go and vote in Palestine, go and have a go. Good luck, though, because they haven't had an election since 2005.
But also, I don't think you should treat any citizens in your community and people you're asking to elect you as if they're just kind of homogenous blocks.
Yeah.
Like, I'll upset the Muslims if I say this.
Yeah,
I'll upset the working class people if I say this. You're supposed to stand on certain principles. You're supposed to engage with them. Also, if you look at polls and things, yes, a lot of people with British Muslims are concerned about Palestine. It's way down their list of priorities.
Yeah.
The idea that they are just this kind of homogenous block.
No, but a lot
and
of it is driven,
obviously
of
not
course,
true.
by the councillors, you know, Labour councillors who get into some of these constituencies and make out that their view is the one which is a common view, which, of course, it isn't. I mean, funnily enough, there was one Labour councillor in North London when Mike Freer put out his statement last night, actually mocking him, you know, and she had to then take it down. Can't remember her name, not even going to give her the publicity. But, you know, her first reaction was to make fun of a guy who's had death threats. Brilliant, you know, because he's pro-Israel. Give me a break.
But I think he's just from my observations sitting through PMQs every Wednesday, it's interesting that you obviously certain Labour MPs keep raising this issue, but you find the Scottish nationalists, they raise it week in, week out. And one of my colleagues said to me, why don't they ever talk about Scotland? You know, this is what people in Scotland want them to talk about, not
well, Hamza
Palestine.
Useless has got more supporters in Gaza than he's got in Edinburgh. You know, that's why. They don't want to talk about Scotland because they're messing Scotland up. And so he'd like to talk about something which takes everybody's mind off that. But listen, we've got lots to talk about, so great to see you all. We will have you back shortly. You're watching The Independent Republic of Mike Graham. Coming up after the break, Labour's coming up with more ingenious ways to funnel money from your wallet into the pockets of the union bosses. Stay tuned for the ride. Choo-choo! Now, a Pizza Hut in Canada made a rather unfortunate typo when it had to close up shop, leaving many rather red in the face. Yes, the classic mistake, we've all done it, right, of misspelling circumstances as circumcision. I wonder what the person who conjured up this sign was actually distracted by. There's a bit of thinking about. But that's not the only typo for the history books. Who can forget the famous Donald Trump Covfefe tweet? Still don't really know what that was all about. And take a look at this. Back in 2017, a certain Cambridge newspaper took typos to a whole new level. I mean, how do you manage that? More like an editor's day off than a typo. A copy of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone once sold for nearly £70,000 due to a simple typo on the back cover over when the word philosopher was spelt wrong. Now, joining me now, the panellists are all back to discuss the big stories of the day. We've got Spiked Online editor Tom Slater, editor of the Daily Express, Sam Lister, and the broadcaster Andrew Eborn. They've said you're not a barrister anymore. Have you been?
I know what's happened there.
You've been debarred.
I've been
since
debarred
last year.
It was that Pizza Hut story.
Now, typos. I mean, for all of us who write for a living, terrible, terrible mistakes can be made, can't they? I probably should have asked you this before. I'm going to ask you now. I mean,
I'm not fessing up to anything.
Any horrendous typos that you've made?
There's one recurring one which we'd always run into, which is because you often find if you're writing about politics, you talk about the public, you talk about public life.
Yeah.
So the number of times that you get a piece of copy before it goes up a light soap which says, "This is a real problem for pubic life," or the pubic are not happy about this.
Especially at Christmas because there's no L.
Do you know what the biggest problem now, of course, though, is when your phone corrects something that you don't want it to correct to. And I've got some. I mean, I get some very weird things that suddenly pop up And you go, well, that's not the alternative word that I was looking for. Please don't correct my text. And I had one very embarrassing one, which I sent to a friend of mine once, and it was, I can't remember what the original question was, but it was, do you fancy something or other? But it came out as the F word. I was like, and it suddenly went, and I just got the laughing emojis back. And I went, obviously. And he said, did you send that to the wrong person? I said, no, I didn't.
No, I really meant it.
It was actually, I didn't mean to say it at all. It wasn't that I sent it to the wrong person. It's a terrible thing to do.
Well, it ties in beautifully with the common mistake that they have about shoplifters, and shoplifters will be prostitutes.
Yes.
Which I've seen many times.
Circumcisions are
very hard.
Circumcisions are cut above the rest.
It really is very good.
No tips. No tips at that
They're
pizza.
here all week. Now, recent polls have uncovered that those people from Gen Z are more likely to believe that feminism has done more harm than good, in contrast to baby boomers and Generation X, who seem more supportive of the feminist cause. The poll also found that a fifth of men aged 16 to 29 seem to like Andrew Tate. Well, I mean, a fifth of men, I'm quite surprised it's as high as that, actually. But, I mean, he does appeal to a certain type of young man, I think. I mean, I know plenty of people who've got teenage sons. One of mine's quite keen on Andrew Tate. And he does seem to appeal to a lot of kids who are around the kind of, I would say, 15 to 18 sort of area, who have gone through the school system and been basically told that they're worthless, hopeless, weak, nasty,
you're right.
to blame for everything.
A lot of these kids are lost, and what they're looking for are heroes.
Yeah.
And if you have a forceful character, that's what they're going to follow. So Andrew Tate is that forceful character. He peddles a narrative which, as you say, is contrary to the stuff they're teaching.
Although I was watching Ben Shapiro on Piers Morgan last night, and Andrew Tate and he have got a sort of feud going on.
Yes.
And Andrew Tate said that, you know, Ben Shapiro's not a real man, and he said to Ben, what do you make of that? He said, well, you know, I'm married, I've got 4 kids, I consider that to be more of a man than walking around with his shirt off in a Romanian prison where you don't actually see anybody at all. So, I mean, he's kind of got a point, hasn't he?
I've always found his embrace by some people on the American right, their embrace of Andrew Tate very odd.
Yes.
Even, you know, his background in running a seedy webcam business and now him being up on traffic.
I mean, the thing is, he's clearly a very bright guy, and he says some interesting things. I mean, as a woman, Sam, I mean, if you're a mother, what do you make of Andrew Tate?
I have to say, I find it incredibly depressing that young boys look up to him. I can see why, because there is a vacuum. If a vacuum is created, then, as Andrew says, young boys are looking for heroes. I just think it is really sad that somebody who treats women so badly and, you know, by his own admission, regardless of all the court cases and what have you, by his own admission, this is a man who does not treat women with respect, I think it's fair to say. And I just find that really depressing. I mean, I speak to a lot of men about this issue, that there is an MP called Nick Fletcher who represents my hometown of Doncaster, who campaigns all the time about men's issues. He wants a men's minister. He says, why should there be a minister for women and equalities? Why is there not a minister for men? Because actually there are the suicide rates for men far higher. There are men's health issues that don't get addressed in the same way as perhaps breast cancer and other women's issues do. I do get that, and I think perhaps that's something that ought to be looked at, how you do address those issues that he talks about. But I think when it comes to people like Andrew Tate, I just think it's incredibly depressing.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he fills a void because there's nothing there. If there were other things there, maybe he wouldn't be quite so
You're absolutely right. And it's the old P.T. Barnum thing. If you want to draw a crowd, start a fight. So he knows how to poke the bear, doesn't he?
And also there is this kind of, you know, thing that young people do now when they see people with money. Yeah. You know, I mean, it was slightly different, I suppose, when I was younger. But now when they see these footballers who drive around in these ridiculously expensive cars and wear watches that cost more than most people earn, and, you know, they look at Andrew Tate and go, oh, he's got a Bugatti. And, you know, he smokes cigars all the time. Nobody tells him he can't. And he can do what he likes. And, you know, it kind of appeals to that sort of adolescent wish list.
And I think he also appeals to, as you were talking about earlier, Mike, about the fact, because there is this kind of steady diet of, you know, toxic masculinity and men are dreadful and whatever. You know, and it's something which is kind of in the culture, generally speaking. So someone can just very easily come along and say, no, that's rubbish. Actually, women are the problem. Just
I mean,
flip it on
could
its
you
head,
get
and there
away
is
with
always
saying
going to
that
be
there was such a thing as toxic femininity?
Well, it'll be interesting, the whole backlash about Barbie and things like that as well, because a lot of people, and they're talking about the Oscars and they're not getting recognised, and some people saying, oh, it's great from one side, but it's gone completely the other way. And I think actually if you had a really positive role model that kids can look up to, that would be brilliant. And there has never been a better time for a positive role model.
Yeah.
And the fact that Andrew Tate's managed to get into this space and say, look, come and follow me and we'll look after you, shows how dangerous and how sort of easily led some people are.
Yeah, I guess so. Let's talk about dry January. I mean, I certainly didn't practice it. Anybody here?
Dry gin, dry white wine, dry champagne.
Absolutely.
I had all of those.
I always think dry January is a bit of a myth, isn't it? Because in order to have dry January, you have to not drink on January the 1st.
No, exactly.
Which, if you've got any kind of life, you're out having some kind of party, aren't you? You know, so at least you're drinking until about maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. Unless you've got literally no life, you know. Yeah. But I just don't get it. See, this thing that, I mean, I've generally got a kind of an aversion to doing anything that everybody else does at the same time. And I refuse to watch Traitors. I might watch it in about 3 years' time. You know, but I'm not watching anything that everybody's going, oh, you must watch it. It's really good. You know, not interested in dry January, really, because it's just very difficult to do.
I can't get past the point that January, the most depressing usual month. Surely that is the one month when actually you really need to have a good time.
See, I don't find it. I have to
drink every day in January.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just for that month.
So they say, oh, January is really depressing. I don't find January
It's not depressing. It's a glorious month.
Oh, you're happy all the time.
I am happy all the time.
I'm the same. If you're going to be unhappy, you can be unhappy anytime.
Yes.
True. It's a very good.
I mean, people go, it's because of the weather. You know, the weather's pretty awful most of the time. You know, what about when it rains all the time in June?
Dry January.
It always does. Everybody goes, oh, it's very wet. You go, well, Wimbledon's on. It's always raining when Wimbledon's on.
Yes.
That's what happens.
You can find a positive. And actually, non-alcoholic drinks in pubs are more expensive.
Yeah, you were saying this the other day.
Exactly. They make a bigger margin on your funny fizzy drinks coming out of that stuff than they do on the alcohol.
And I would feel very, very unhappy about doing that. Let's go back to the big story of the night, though, because since you were in here when we revealed that this guy who they're looking for, Abdul Aadii, is in fact an asylum seeker who tried twice to get given asylum here, failed twice, but then was given finally on the third attempt permission to stay. It now turns out that he's also a sex offender. From Newcastle Crown Court in 2018, he was convicted of a sexual offence which included sexual assault and exposure. He was given an unpaid work order and a suspended sentence. It's understood that that was completed in 2020. Curiously, though, which is also more interesting, police are now saying that he may have been known to them prior to the incident. Now, I don't even know what that means, but if it means that they knew he was in the area, they knew that he was involved in some kind of stalkerish type activity or something, and they didn't stop it. I mean, that's going to be bad news.
And all of this is going to come out. And as I say, it's very dangerous in these things because normally defence lawyers will be all over it to say that his case will be prejudiced when it comes to trial. So they've got to be quite careful in the media how they report it. But as you say, this information is there.
Yeah, but he hasn't been charged yet.
Well,
so
from that point of view,
yes. I mean, you're a barrister. You should know all this.
Oh, absolutely.
Correct you on the law.
Why do you think it's debarred?
I mean, that's why you're no longer embarrassed.
Well, I'm not a criminal one.
Don't worry, you can go and be one of those volunteer police.
Oh,
you need to know the law for that.
Make it up.
Arrest people when he
go along,
Yeah, exactly right. But, I mean, this is going to be a huge... Because I think, and this is where it becomes political, Sam, because for the government, this is a massive Achilles heel. You know, for all the people who have spent many, many weeks and months and possibly years saying you have to get to grips with this problem. It's another crime. It doesn't matter how minuscule it is when you compare it to all the other crimes committed by people who are not asylum seekers. These are the kind of hills that people like Rishi Sunak end up sort of losing their careers over, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, if you look back at the terror attacks we've had in this country, very often you find that these people are on our watch list of some kind.
Yeah.
The problem is there are thousands of people on watch lists, and to monitor people round the clock is incredibly labour intensive. You need, I think it's something like 4 to 6 people or something to monitor one person. You can't do that for 9,000 people, for example. There are not unlimited resources.
Right.
So obviously the authorities, whether it's the security services or the police, have to prioritise. And clearly people do slip through that net. And I think that where it becomes an issue politically is if mistakes have been made, if there was information that should have been used to step up that kind of surveillance or, for example, bring them into custody. for whatever reason, that's where it becomes an issue if there are actual failings.
Yeah.
But, you know, as a society, we cannot monitor everybody on a watch list.
Well, you say that, but this is where my pet baby comes in about artificial intelligence and facial recognition. And actually, you can monitor people 100% of the time.
But there are civil liberties issues around that, Andrew. You know that about
but also, Andrew, you've got to, if you want to do that, you've still got to have a human somewhere looking at it and going, OK, is that the person we've picked up? Is that the person that we want to find? You know, is it not a case of mistaken identity? Do you then send, you know, the police to that location? You know, it's not as simple as just going, oh, a computer could pick all that up. Because you've still got to use a police officer.
But it helps join the dots there, doesn't it?
Well, it might do, if it's not flawless, but it won't be flawless, will it?
No, and there was a case very recently about a man in Texas who was wrongly accused of a robbery. And actually, he was 2,000 miles away, and it was picked up by facial recognition. And it was a scandalous case, and he was put in prison for a little while and so on and so forth. But one of my points is that we could track this guy down very, very quickly. At the moment, he still
the picture that they've got, which they released this afternoon, of him with the injury, I'm not sure whether that's from CCTV or what, but as I say, they didn't release the original picture of him on the night that they, as far as I'm concerned, they should have released it, because they clearly discovered his identity before the press conference today. But, you know, it seems to me that, you know, hopefully they catch him before he does anything wrong to anybody else. But a couple of other stories to get to. Shakespeare's Globe will not show Richard III with a disability. I mean, it says following a backlash here. Was it a hunch backlash? Sorry.
There we go. We're working on that.
It started with a cyst. There's a song there somewhere.
What I don't understand about this is because there's always a lot of argument these days about casting.
I know.
Should it be in line with the character's ethnic background, gender, and so on? In this case, you've got a woman playing Richard III. That's fine. But because she's not disabled, that's not all right. So there's this kind of weird double standard that's operating.
So there's this kind of, I mean, none of us will ever understand the hierarchy of things that you have to have done in order to be able to play somebody.
And that's where people get tripped up, is because of the fact that they think, we thought we were doing something very interesting, kind of subversive. Oh, God, we forgot the disabled aspect. And now they've got...
And apparently 100, I think it's 100 disabled actors, we can call them now, have apparently complained. But, I mean, presumably if you haven't got a hunchback, but you're disabled in another way, you're no more able to play the part than somebody who's not disabled at all, eh?
And you're absolutely right. And the bizarre thing is, where have we lost the idea that actors can act? I mean, the whole idea is to play a role which is different. And drag came from Shakespeare, which is boys dressed as a girl. And so the whole idea of that sort of thing. But you're right. A woman is now playing Richard III. That's pretty inclusive, isn't it? You're working on that sort of basis. But the whole idea of the Shakespeare side was to show that just a deformed body doesn't mean you've got a deformed mind. And it's that sort of antithesis which they're trying to sort of work on that sort of premise.
Yeah, but it's like Doctor Who. Do you remember when they did the latest Doctor Who? They rewrote Davros as a character who, forgive me if you're not a Doctor Who fan, I'm not particularly either, but Davros was like sort of half man, half Dalek. So he had the top half of a human and bottom half of, you know, a machine. And they changed him because they thought it looked like he might be in a wheelchair, and because he's a bad guy, he can't be, you know, in some way disabled. You go, sorry? I mean, you've had to go through so many kind of, you know, ridiculous, malfunctions of the brain to get to that point. You're kind of going, why don't you just leave him as half man, half Dalek? You know, it's a science fiction show. It's not real.
No, you're absolutely right, Mike, as always. And I think it is nonsense, isn't it? So you need to look at that as sort of principle. This is art. And art doesn't need to be polluted in that way. We're losing lots of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. You can't do that anymore as a pantomime. Oh, no, you can't.
Well, Disney kind of lost the plot on that altogether, didn't they? Because they immediately said that they weren't going to hire any dwarfs. Then the dwarfs got up in arms and said, well, hang on, this is the only job we can ever do.
That's their annual check.
And outrage because 6 out of 7 dwarves were not happy. There's a gag there somewhere.
There is.
But you work on that sort of principle. And that's the problem. They're rewriting history about, like, the non-consensual kiss. Do you remember that? So in Snow White and the... Well, when she sort of woke up or whatever it was. Who was the one who fell asleep?
Yeah, it was Snow White.
It was Snow White.
Or was it Sleeping Beauty? Was it Sleeping Beauty? Accused in the title.
That's very good.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, it really, you start to go a bit mad, don't you? I mean, I've been saying this for a while now, that when nobody bothers doing April Fool jokes anymore, or April Fool stories, because the actual real stories are so ridiculous, aren't they? Absolutely bonkers mad. Welcome back. You're watching The Independent Republican, Mike Graham, right here on Talk TV. But let's have a look at some of the other stories in the papers with the panel. They're all back. Don't make the same mistakes as me. There's a story on the front of the Daily Mirror today. Gaza's message to Marcus Rashford, Paul Gascoigne. I mean, when you're getting aid and assistance from Paul Gascoigne, you've got to think the times have gone pretty wrong, haven't they? Life has gone a bit wrong. Rashford was fined 2 weeks' wages for his 12-hour drinking session the other day.
Yes.
Mm.
Everybody's coming out to help him, aren't they, at the moment? I mean, Piers was saying, look, you should have somebody like Sir Alex in your life to keep him straight and narrow and try. Right, you're right. If Gaza's coming out and telling him, but actually, I think you're right. We've discussed this before. They get a lot of money very quickly. You need to work out what they can do with that money and make sure that somebody's there to guide them.
I know he misbehaved, but it's not quite on Gaza scale, is it?
It's not really. And also,
one night out in Belfast.
Just to clarify how things are going, he was actually playing football tonight. For Manchester United, and he scored a goal.
There you go, fantastic.
Against Wolverhampton Wanderers.
Hey.
He's just a young lad and he should be allowed a couple of nights out.
I mean, a couple of 12-hour
let's not get too carried away.
Yeah, let's not get carried away. Well, I mean, I suppose a lot of people will be pleased to know that Gaza's still, able to give advice out. He's not on another 12-hour bender. Couple of interesting ones. A waste of space in the Sun. World in crisis. It says civil servants are being instructed where to dispose of their rubbish, with a complicated flow chart that's been branded utterly daft. I mean, this is ridiculous. I'm not quite sure who's come up with this, but basically, where should I throw my rubbish is the sustainability plan that's been drawn up. And I mean, you can see it up there now on the screen. I've for ages been going on about the ridiculous number of bins that we now have to deal with. Brown ones, green ones, blue ones, red ones, it's just incredible.
Well, Mike, I've got a confession. Upstairs, I said to Andrew, where's the bin in here?
Yes.
Pointing me to it. There's 2 separate bins.
Is there?
Neither of us knew which one.
Well, I thought you said, where's your bin? I said, Barbados. But what I got, they've got an acronym as well, Sustainability and Plastic Reduction Action Team, SPRAT for short. Glorious, isn't it? IHA, I hate acronyms. But you work on that sort of principle. But it says if you can crumple it up, it means you put it in a certain bin.
Yes.
Which bin there?
That's probably right. It's got to be good.
Oh, mine.
We have a productivity problem in this country, and I think this is for civil servants. If civil servants are spending all this time with, how many have we got, about 10 bins there to work out all this, go through this flow chart?
But
no wonder we're not doing very well in the country.
Generally speaking, rubbish tends to expand depending on how much space you've got to put it in. So the more bins you've got, the more rubbish you're going to collect, right? You're going to start putting all sorts of things in bins that you never would have otherwise put in bins. I mean, I'm a great believer in burning rubbish. I don't mean, the kind of rubbish that's toxic, but, if you've got, cardboard boxes, you've got sort of wrapping paper, Christmas, that kind of thing. Yeah. You've got a garden, stick it all in the incinerator and set fire to it.
There's nothing more wonderful than a fire, isn't there?
It's very sort of...
therapeutic.
Therapeutic is the word I'm looking for.
I'm not sure you're allowed to do that anymore, though.
No, but people come out. I knew you were going to say it. Absolutely.
I'm not. It's not my rule. It's not my rule.
No, but it's in the countryside.
They can try and catch you.
In the countryside, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're meant to ask permission, but actually,
There you go.
you have to ring the council. They're never there. So
really?
I'm too busy working out which bin to put everything in.
Yeah. This was around yesterday, but we didn't do it. Eye rolls at work are now aggressive. Rolling your eyes in a meeting. I mean, to be honest, it's probably quite a rude thing to do. It's not something I would really do.
But it's not. But the point of this story is that this has been held up as an example of racism. So that it was within the civil service. So they were having these diversity courses, as they spend a lot of their days in the civil service getting diversity courses these days. And one of the claims is that it could be a racist microaggression if you roll your eyes at someone who's not white, essentially. There's actually been a couple of cases that have gone through ACAS, the arbitration settlement, because there's been someone who has claimed that when a boss has rolled their eyes at them, it was because it was racially motivated.
What if you're white and somebody who isn't white rolls their eyes at you? Is that also racist?
I don't think that counts. No. I don't think it goes in both directions.
Sorry,
but
I just thought I'd ask.
But it's good you did ask. Just you've got to be careful these days. But it's just all this microaggression. You just think. It's almost like they want people to engage in a form of like racial etiquette. Racial etiquette.
Well, they'd like people to spend their entire day at work just complaining about somebody and having sort of meetings with HR. You wouldn't actually get any work done. All you would do is discuss, what terrible thing happened to you and how you feel put upon. Because a microaggression, I think, is anything you think it is, isn't it?
No, exactly. It's completely subjective, and it's often things where it's all up for interpretation. Something that someone might have said to one person, they wouldn't take offence at, but because you know, some people tend to look for slights in a way that other people don't. It's just a psychological thing.
And you have to have a means of showing your disapproval sometimes. An eye roll is quite effective, I would have thought.
No, exactly.
But the only reason to do an eye roll is if somebody else is watching you do it. So you don't necessarily do it to the person that you're doing the eye roll about. You do it to somebody else.
Exactly.
So if he was annoying me, I'd do an eye roll to you.
Yes.
And hopefully he wouldn't
Several during this show. I saw them.
Yeah,
it was good.
Absolutely right.
So did I.
Here's one. You've got the nanny state. Apparently, making pupils play rugby, says the Times, is a form of child abuse. I mean, seriously?
Well, they're very worried, aren't they, because of brain injuries and things like that. So you can play tag rugby now without...
That's not rugby, though, is it? What's the point? You know, they say children should no longer participate in high-impact sports, such as rugby or boxing. Well,
what age? I mean, it's a... Yeah.
I mean, you can have protection for your head. I mean, you can wear protection. You know, are they just going to do away with all contact sports?
Well, that's the problem, and they've been as a result of these sports injuries. And so you're right, as long as you get the right protection in place. So American football, they're all heavily padded up. Rugby over here, we haven't had much protection on that sort of basis. And it's come as a result of those terrible head injuries that people have had. And they start the children with this tag rugby, and then they get into contact sports later. But be aware of the risk. And I think you're right, Mike, if you put protection on there, you should be fine.
I mean, Eric Anderson, apparently a professor of sport
at
the University of Winchester. This is where the country's gone wrong. They didn't used to have a University of Winchester, right? It used to be Winchester Poly.
Right? Was
and now there's a professor of sport there who says sports for children should not intentionally harm their brains.
Yes.
Oh, really? Well, of course they're not. They're not meant to harm their brains. I mean,
that's not why they do it. You know,
the point of it.
I mean, God save us. Right, let's do them. I'm afraid Harry and Meghan are back in the Times. Page 3.
Hurrah!
Sussexes have set up a bunch of Netflix projects, according to, presumably, these will be friends of theirs. It's the executive at the company has said. Harry and Meghan signed a 5-year deal with Netflix in 2020, said to be worth $100 million. Somebody called Bella Bajaria, Chief Content Officer at Netflix, has disclosed that Archewell could have a burst of activity over the next 12 months. Not really a story, that, is it?
It's not, although I'm quite excited about this because of the fact that I find Harry and Meghan unintentionally very funny. Like, they don't... That's one thing.
Oh, they are funny.
You sit in the interviews, you know, they're getting very upset about things. They claim things happened that didn't happen in quite spectacular fashion.
My favourite was the car chase, the high-speed car chase.
That was great.
In New York, which was brilliant.
Well, you can't have a high-speed car chase in Manhattan in the middle
Well,
of the
not only that,
afternoon,
but people were actually filming them as they were leaving, going down the road, you know, very slowly.
I still think my favourite was when she claimed that a South African actor had told her that South Africans celebrated their wedding as it did Mandela being freed. And then when they found this gentleman, he had no recollection of this conversation.
Recollections may vary, I seem to remember.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Well, I think, I mean, this is a bit, not that I would ever wish to disabuse my my colleagues at the Times. I mean, this is a bit thin, this story. Here's what she said. Speaking at an event in Hollywood to announce the service's forthcoming releases, they actually have a bunch in development, she said. They're working on a couple of unscripted things, as well as a film and a series, all in very early development.
There you go.
I mean, very early development sounds to me in Hollywood like you've just thought of it and you haven't actually written anything down.
Yeah.
Right.
Every waiter in Hollywood has early development of a project. So you work on that basis.
Yes, I'm working on a pilot. Aren't we all, darling?
Thank you.
You know, I mean, obviously the main story on a lot of the front pages is this manhunt, which is now a huge story, it has to be said, because of what we now know, that he was twice denied. Turns out he's from Afghanistan. We keep getting extra bits of information. Twice denied asylum before succeeding by claiming to be a Christian, according to the Daily Mail.
Which is what happened with the Liverpool bomber.
That's right, yeah.
About before.
And he spent some time with a Christian family, I think, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
And I think it was some organisation was recommending that that's how you get in.
Yeah.
Say that you've changed your religion.
Yeah.
But he's a convicted sex offender through a flask of chemicals. It's not clear, I suppose, what his relationship is with the woman yet, is it?
No, and they say they were probably knew each other.
Yeah.
So they certainly know. Yeah, they certainly seem to have known each other.
But it's a horrible story, and what's
really
happened to the two children as well on this sort of basis. So
it's just ghastly.
It is absolutely appalling.
It's just absolutely ghastly, dreadful, absolutely dreadful. Let's have a look finally at, I think it's the Independent. Minister tells MPs we got it wrong on Afghan war heroes. This is the Independent saying that there should be sanctuary for special forces who fought alongside UK troops. And this is obviously for the people who are still trapped in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And this is the trouble, because these would be the genuine asylum seekers who have fought on our side, who we should be helping. But this character is absolutely screwing up their chances.
And this is the problem.
Because then everybody turns against every person from Afghanistan.
Yeah.
But actually that, you know, we all remember, don't we, the kind of chaotic evacuation of Kabul.
Oh, yeah.
And
Horrendous.
in that chaos, obviously, a lot of people who should have been brought out, it just couldn't
Just got
happen.
missed.
And then, obviously, once the Taliban were back firmly in charge and doing what they were doing, it made it impossible to get many of these people out.
Right.
But
So they
obviously,
re-examined 400
yeah.
cases, is what they're saying. The Special Forces soldiers rejected for settlement. So they need to do this quickly.
Yeah.
It is appalling.
Well,
what
you
is
would think
happening.
they could do it quickly, but of course the other problem is that there's people now who have gone to Pakistan claiming that they are people who were helping the British military, and they might not all be. That's the other problem, is you leave it so long, you just don't know, do you?
Yeah.
It's appalling.
No, absolutely dreadful stuff. We can return, just before we go, to BBC radio shuns, possibly my favourite story of the day. Apparently BBC listening figures have slumped across all stations. Well, we could have told them that, because ever since they've been deciding to sort of chase a younger audience and getting rid of people like Chris Evans, whose show at Virgin is doing really well, they've lost millions and millions of people.
They don't understand their own audience,
No.
because kids, young people, teenagers, they don't listen to DAB radio. They're not watching terrestrial or even like any kind of scheduled television.
Yeah.
So this desire to kind of chase them, often getting rid of people who were actually quite liked amongst the older demographics, who actually bothered to tune in. It's insane.
Oh, I know loads
but
of
they can't
people
help
who used to
themselves.
listen to radio too, who just don't bother now because they got rid of all the people that they liked. And they just don't go there anymore.
People
They've
vote
lost-
with their feet.
Yeah, they've lost like 2 million. Radio 1 managed to lose something like, I think, 2 million people just in the last quarter from, October to December of 2023.
Well, it's extraordinary. They were saying, look, Chris Moyles in 2004, 2008, he had an audience of 7.9 million. That's gone all the way down to my good mate Greg James, who's on 4.3 now.
Yeah.
Well,
it'll be half, won't it, soon?
Yeah, exactly. And you're right. You need to look at those sort of aspects. Whilst stations such as the wonderful ones in this building are flourishing.
Well, I mean, we might have smaller audiences, but we're going in the right direction, whereas they're going down, and with every sort of passing scandal, they'll go down even further. I can't help them, I'm afraid. Bad luck if you're at the BBC, because we're going to be passing you on the other way, and that'll be what happens. But thank you very much indeed to all of you. That's the last show that we've got here, of course, but we'll be back next week with loads and loads of stories, and there's lots of stuff. I'll be back on your screens tomorrow night with Plank of the Week, which is at 7 p.m. I think you'll find that there's an awful lot of plankery going on, and we'll be doing all of that. But thank you to Tom. Thank you, of course, to both of you as well. And we'll see you next week. You can call us anytime you want. This is the Independent Republic of Mike Graham.